Hello, welcome to this edition of Live All Your Life. Today we finish up our conversation with Joseph Fetz. Nearly a 2-hour interview, and you're just catching the last 45 minutes here. So for the entire uncut version, please head over to my website at liveallyourlife.com. Also, be sure to join us next week. This show is published every Tuesday on the Voluntary Virtues Network, 3 p.m. Pacific Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And next week we will be finishing up our conversation with Tiger Lily Gonzalez as she explains her trip to Mexico on a motorcycle by herself. Pretty awesome journey that she's on. So be sure to check that out next week. And without further ado, here is the end of the conversation where I'm deep in the whiskey and Joseph is deep in conversation. It's a great finish to a great talk. I hope you enjoy it. And it all starts right now. Turn the wrench, though. You know, you can't just stare at it, being afraid.
And like, you know, when I was on Mike's show, I mean, I gave you guys a pretty large impression that when I was in the Navy, I mean, that was the most horrible experience that one can ever imagine, and it was pretty horrible. I will give you guys that. However, if I had not done that, I would not have the perspective I have now, and there's a couple of realizations that I came to when I was in there. One, I was first in my class twice in a row, and I was like second in my class the next 2 times. So that showed me, whoa, you know, these are supposed to be very smart people. It's a very hard, you know, one of the hardest enlistment ratings that you can have is a sonar tech. And it showed me, wow, I really can think. I really can, you know, absorb information and understand it and understand concepts. But the other thing is I also became a technician. Like, you know, I went through their advanced electronics program, and that showed me, you know, how to work on sonar gear, you know, the sonar equipment, which involved, you know, working on circuits and troubleshooting electronics and integrated systems. You know, I had 20 pieces of equipment that went from the front of the ship to the back of the ship. And when we got there, it was all broken, so I kind of got a lot of hands-on, you know, figuring that out, and that translated into less fear about trying to fix something.
Right.
Now, I never knew how to work on a car before that, but now it's like simple to me. It's like, okay, I'll just read up on how an internal combustion engine works and figure that out, and then the taking it apart, just remember, don't lose all the parts, and remember where they go back. You know, right. It's like,
try not to have extra parts when you're done. Yeah.
But had I not done that, I would never have acquired that skill. I don't think, at least not at that point in my life. Nor would I have had any sort of confidence in my own intellect. You know, as far as the more advanced stuff goes. So, right. You know, even though that was overall a very bad experience, I am appreciative of the fact that had I not done that, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I wouldn't, probably would not be a libertarian or an anarchist. I probably would not have read, you know, all the books that I've read. All these things would not have happened had I not done that. Even though, you know, I kind of wish, in a moral respect, that I hadn't. But I never did do anything that I would consider to be morally reprehensible while I was there. I always stood my ground against that. and that's part of the reason why I got kicked out. Because,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah. Well, and I'm big on, you know, it's kind of funny because libertarians, anarchists, they tend to, in topics of things like police brutality, a lot of times the military, the police, we tend to collectivize these people.
Yes.
And we're individualists.
Exactly.
You know, that's part of our process, our of thinking, is that we believe in an individual, and you know, you own it. You know, like you own yourself. Well, putting on a uniform doesn't give you a higher moral standard, and that's something we're always teaching, is that, you know, just because you wear a certain costume does not give you a higher moral authority than somebody else. But at the same time, we need to look at the other side of that
the other way around, yeah,
and say putting on a uniform is not an immoral act in and of itself, and so we need
there's a certain guy who I won't mention his name, but he has the I'll just say his initials are CC, and there are some things that he said that I think are reprehensible, because he's ignoring exactly what you're talking about, which is the individual, not just the individual person, but the individual case.
Yes.
Just because somebody does belong to an organization does not mean that they've actually done unjustified things.
Exactly.
Especially to you or to me. They may have done it to somebody else, but that is a case between them and them.
Right.
You know, and you can't go as a third person. You can't go killing somebody just because they did something to somebody else in the past, unless you have some sort of kin relationship or some sort of contract that you can enforce or something like that. I mean, it's collective. It's like libertarian collectivism in a way. It's like collectivizing everybody that, oh, they belong to this group, therefore they're the enemy, and we can kill them all just because they are part of that group.
Right.
That's not how this philosophy works. And in fact, when I read I did talk to Jeffrey Tucker later about his Brutalist article. When I read that, I actually Jeffrey Tucker wasn't even aware of him at the time, but when I read his article, that's who I had in mind when I was reading it. I'm like, whoa, like he's describing this guy almost to a T, like, and you know, it's just amazing to me, and that like you talked about earlier, that even within the libertarian sphere of things, you know, there's all these disagreements, but a lot of them are very bad arguments, you know, that I'm seeing with what's called the internet libertarian. You know, they have I guess a vague concept of these ideas, but they haven't applied them a few logical steps further, and actually gotten to the root and the meat of the issue that they're talking about. And I'm sure you see this all the time. It's like, you know, that they may be right on this, but once you get to something a little bit more complex, they turn into a complete idiot on the subject, and it's disheartening sometimes, because it's like, wow, I really thought that we were making some headway here, and then now I'm seeing this.
Yeah.
You know.
I suppose it's part of that necessary process that we've been talking about, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's just, you know, that's with any sort of philosophy, especially a political philosophy. You're going to see a lot of people who are super ideological about it, and that's usually people who are slightly newer to it. You know, that's all they see. They got their blinders on. Oh my God, I found the truth. You know, and I'll admit, I've been there before. You'll see people who've been around for a while, but who just haven't quite gotten the whole thing right. You know, they got their own conception of it. You see the people who really understand it and really have gone through the literature, so much so that they could just repeat it back to you like it's nothing. You know, like, you know, a whole paragraph out of, you know, some Hoppe book or some, you know, Rothbard book or something. And then you got the people who I think are kind of fakers. You know, they're kind of latching on to something because all their friends are doing it, you know, and it seems kind of cool to them, and they're, you know, it's radical, so like, you know, they're kind of against, you know, they want to be the rebel, you know, and I've seen this back and forth, and I've gone through certain of those stages myself. But as I said very early on, is I'm looking for the answers, to how humans interact. What is the right way for them to do so? Libertarianism isn't some sort of, it's not a full, full philosophy that's all encompassing. It deals only with the use of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Is this force justified or is it not? And that's what it comes down to. And in CC's case, I don't think he's justified in his opinion there.
Yeah.
And that's what I'll call it, an opinion.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up too, because you seem to have studied economics pretty extensively, or the libertarian philosophy through economics.
I went through two stages. It was first economics. I used to be a monetarist years ago before I got into Austrian economics. So then I got into Austrian economics for, it was like 2 years of just straight study, reading everything I could get my hands on. And then once I read Man, Economy, and State, I was like, whoa, what's this? After I remember distinctly when I finished reading that book, I realized I was an anarchist.
Mm-hmm.
Which is weird because it's an economics book. It's not a political philosophy book. So it seemed kind of weird that would happen. And then that's when I started getting into political philosophy.
Right. Yeah, for me, ethics is what kind of finally turned me into full anarchy, is that, I couldn't justify any of the use of force that you were talking, like you were talking about, other than defensive force. So
right.
I kind of started on the economics standpoint from, I've always been very much an individualist, and also had a fascination with the market and with entrepreneurialism, and actually how the market works as an individual. Like, what can I do to be productive and successful, et cetera, and find happiness, really, through
right.
my own means of production. So that's what led me into it. But what really finally turned me from a minarchist, if you will, to anarchist was the ethics involved. So it was that part of the concept of the philosophy that was a real turning point for me. But it seems like some people, they will get so far down the rabbit hole on one aspect of the philosophy that they ignore other aspects of it. So I think that's where people kind of get stuck. Things like cop block, or whatever, and they're just so obsessed with this one abuse that's going on that they kind of ignore the rest of the philosophy and where it comes from, and or where it's going. And
at the same time, I'm grateful that they do go out there and expose these things, because for some people that's what it takes for them to see what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I definitely understand the putting the blind, people put the blinders on, and it's only this one issue and everything else. That's like right now the big thing is Bitcoin. That's what everybody's talking about, and it's so funny to me because it's not that hard to understand things. I'll admit it did confuse me for a while, like how it worked and everything else, but God, I see some people like on Facebook, like all they do is talk about Bitcoin. It's like, come on, man. There's got to be another issue that you can think about to talk about. I mean, there's so many issues in human life that can't be just the one.
Right. Yeah. And that singular perspective, I think, can be really dangerous because it gives you a lack of foundation then to ever progress from. It is sort of like what we see with a lot of other camps of philosophy, if you will, like the conservatives, for instance, the modern Republican in America. They have their pet topics, and they totally ignore the ethics of all the other things that they promote. And same with liberals or whatever. And I think that we're really in danger as anarchists of falling into a political philosophy that's all based around one pet uh, I forget the word I'm trying to think of, but yeah, we have this one thing that affects us personally, and if we put blinders on to the rest of the whole philosophy, then we're basically ignoring the needs of everyone else around us and keeping ourselves from developing fully into the rational philosophy. So,
But keep in mind that you can also run into problems here. Like, for instance, the left libertarianism thing. Okay, and I have a feeling that this might be part of, at least related to what you were touching on. Is like, for instance, if we take something like racism, okay, and put it into the context of a libertarian theory. A libertarian theory is dealing with what sort of actions are justified and which are not in the context of I guess, property and scarce resources. Because if you look at anything, conflict is what we're trying to minimize. Okay, before any sort of ethics or anything like that occurred, it was a state of nature of man against man, no different than the animals that a gazelle getting eaten by a lion or whatever. I would bonk you on the head because you had something I wanted. I just take it. So what libertarianism is trying to do is resolve that conflict, because that is the essence of civilization, is that we can discuss these things rather than beat each other over the head to take what you have. And when you start getting into morals such as racism, feminism, stuff like that, then the only way that you can fit that into that paradigm, or that structure, that thing of trying to eliminate conflict, to say, I don't want to see any racism, I don't want to see any inequality, is to form some sort of laws that outlaw this. And that automatically it causes conflict with other people's property.
mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not a racist. I'm not anti-feminist or anti-whatever. I'm not against anybody. I like, I try to get along with everybody. But once you start doing that, you start to realize that the only way to solve those problems in the way that most people want to is for the use of aggression to stop them. Okay? Now, I don't condone being racist, but if you want to be a racist and be a jerk about it or whatever, that's fine, as long as you're not aggressing on somebody else, like physically aggressing on their property or their body or whatever. You can just be a jerk. That's fine. But in the left libertarian spectrum of things, it almost seems like they want to fit that into the libertarian mold in order to say that's a form of aggression in itself, just the belief that somebody is this or that. Mm-hmm. And that gets into really Orwellian territory, because now we're starting to think of just thoughts as aggression, or right. Belief systems or whatever. I can't go with that, and that was the biggest thing that I saw as a drawback of that. Or hierarchy. That's another thing they don't like, is hierarchy. Now, when it comes to a business, the hierarchical structure is contractual.
Right.
Everybody's agreed upon it. Nobody's aggressed upon anybody else. So there are certain hierarchies that occur in nature and occur in human civilization. But you can't be against the word itself and just say that hierarchy is wrong. No, you got to look at how the hierarchy came about. If it came about through, like, say, a monarchical structure where, you got noblemen who were granted their nobility by the sovereign, which is essentially a one-person state, a monopoly, then obviously, yeah, that's unjust. That's not correct, because it necessarily infringes upon the rights of others or aggresses upon them and their property. So that's totally a different thing than, say, a joint stock company, where shareholders pay for this guy to be the CEO and manage, his upper management. Management manages the middle management, and so on and so forth down the line. That's all contractual. Everybody's agreed to this, And it's just like any sort of hierarchical structure. I mean, but the difference is it's voluntary.
Right. And that kind of brings me back to some of Rand's writings. Ayn Rand, and I'm not talking about her novels so much as her philosophical writings, and she describes racism as being just another form of collectivism. So it's a logical fallacy. Which it may not, like you were saying, we can't enforce or assume that someone's way of thinking is a form of aggression. However, it's a logical fallacy that can lead to other forms of aggression down the road.
It can, if you accept that collectivism as just. Yeah, it surely can, and we've seen that happen in history before, with the slave trade, even with say the USSR with the Ukrainians and whatnot. Yeah, there's been a lot of that has happened. Or obviously the biggest example is Nazi, Hitler and Nazi Germany. But I'm sure we can realize that these things represent aggression. And that's that's mostly what libertarianism is concerned with, is aggression against property, which includes one's own body.
Yep.
And deciding, because all these things include, all the things around you, including your body, are both scarce and rivalrous. So like in order for me to have an apple and enjoy it, I got to have property ownership over it. Otherwise you can just snatch it from me. And who has the best claim over the apple? Is it the first user of it, or is it the late comer, the guy that wants to come along and claim it as his? And a libertarian would say it's the first user, the first person to appropriate it, that they logically have the best claim over it. It's the same thing with your body. That's why we have actual laws against murder and rape and things like that, because we realize that the person who has the best claim to that person's body is the body owner, which is the person himself.
Right.
The person who has that physical connection to their body that cannot be gotten rid of. I mean, there's no way to separate your mind from your body. I mean, you can go and meditate or whatever and say you do, but physically speaking, like, there's no way that I can control your arms and your legs and everything else that makes you. I can only use aggression to do that. That's the only way.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to me, too, getting back to the race card, so to speak, is like the modern liberals' way to deal with the aggression against other individuals is actually to collectivize them and then and use force to prevent other people from using force against that other group. But at the same time, they're promoting it because of all the pride issues, black pride, gay pride, this kind of thing. Well, even pride in one's own race or one's own sexual preference or whatever, that kind of pride actually just feeds into the philosophy of collectivism. So they're literally propping up the very thing that they're trying to defend against.
Yeah, I've pointed out some of the problems with, like, say, egalitarianism. It's like for instance, just the word feminism is self-defeating, because you want equality, but you emphasize the inequality.
Right.
Like, by just the usage of the term.
Exactly.
That's self-defeating. It doesn't make sense. But you got to remember, you're talking about the world of politics here, not necessarily political theory. This is politics. This is the area of the state. This is the state's being. It's how it controls the masses. And that's essentially what they're doing, is getting certain sectors of the masses in a frenzy. Oh, I'm so downtrodden, and everybody treats me bad because I'm this and I'm that. oh, well, what should we do? We should pass a law, and that's how we should do it. And then they, all they're doing is using their own feelings as a justification to aggress upon others and steal their property or force them to do their wish. It's just like Bastiat said. I mean, the state is great fiction whereby everybody endeavors to live at the expense of everybody else.
Right.
Now, it's a big contradiction in and of itself. You're not getting to the aim that you really want to get to. All you're doing is getting what you want. Right. From everybody else, because they've been oppressing you, or whatever subjective feeling you have about your current state in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't really establish a time frame for this
discussion
we didn't. Or anything. So I just noticed an hour and a half has gone by, and I am really enjoying talking to you. I want to touch on one other topic before I let you go, or before I just kind of have you, throw in anything else that you want to talk about. But you had mentioned to me that you had some specific goals for communicating Bitcoin and the ideas around Bitcoin and the philosophy there. So can you touch on that a little bit about where you're headed with that?
Now, as I said, I'm agnostic as far as support or non-support of Bitcoin. I don't have a wallet. I've never owned a Bitcoin. I know tons of people that do. I also know tons of people that say it's a bubble, it's crap, it's a scam, everything else. But it is something that exists objectively in our lives, and people are using it. And in fact, when I went to New Hampshire, I observed people who use it exclusively. They get paid in it. They pay their rent in it. They buy all their, every good and service they can with it, with the exception of, say like a public utility or something like that. Obviously, it's a little more difficult.
Right. Well, there's a new Bitcoin a debit card that you can get for things like that now.
Right, and there's also other services that transfer, that do it, for a small fee of a few cents or whatever on a dollar to transfer things, whatever you have to pay for. That's mostly online. Now the thing that I noticed is many people were decrying it early on, and I'll admit I was one of these people, for it not being compatible with Mises's regression theorem.
Right.
Now, if you notice, the main objection they had was that it didn't have any direct use value. You can't. What are you gonna use a Bitcoin for? You can't even hold it. It's an intangible.
Right.
It's like, what are you gonna use it for? But then it occurred to me, well, yes, it is an intangible. Okay, so if it's an intangible, then it's probably better to classify it as a service, not necessarily the Bitcoin, the unit itself, but the network, the blockchain, and everything else. It's essentially a payment service. It's a transacting service. Okay, so like think of something like Visa or Western Union. Okay. People don't value those things because of the dollar itself. They value those things because they're a means of transacting. Mm-hmm. And that's something I hinted upon on Mike's show. That was the reason why it's most valued. Is that it's an easy means of transacting. But even more than that, it's trustless. Okay, it has no third party that you must trust in order to transact in it. And it is almost costless. I mean, to the person transacting,
right?
Which makes it very, I guess, businesses would see the value in that because they're paying Visa and MasterCard and all these fees just to have this machine there for people to swipe a card and send stuff.
Right.
And even more, you don't even have to swipe a card. You just got a little, RT code. Is that what's called, RT code?
Yeah. Yeah, what you're describing is really relatable to me because I also own a company where I have membership. I own a strength and conditioning facility, and people pay by the month. And I would not survive without Visa and MasterCard at this point because it allows auto debit and things like this. It's a service that I'm paying for. However, it sticks in my craw every month when they dip into my account and pull out $300. You know, it's the several members worth of revenue that Visa and MasterCard take from me for a very minimal service. Yeah.
Right. So this, and also you have to trust Visa to make sure that the accounting is right.
Yes.
Okay. And whereas with this, it's everybody, pretty much everybody that's on the blockchain, everybody that's in the network, it's all publicly available. Everybody can check it themselves, and the computers do all the work, and obviously that's how mining works. Okay. So I think a lot of people miss the boat on exactly where this direct use value came from. Okay. And then, even worse, some people are saying that it has no exchange value. Well, I'm sorry, but it apparently does because it's got a price.
Mm-hmm.
That would tell you right away it's got exchange value because it's got a price. It's got a price. It's got exchange value. Now, then comes the next thing, which is it a money? It's like, well, you got to remember, value is subjective. You know, there is no, you know, I'm sure it's a money to some people. You know, like if that's all they use in all their transactions, then to them, even if it's only two people transacting back and forth and nothing but Bitcoin, then it represents a money, and that it's their general medium of exchange. Mm-hmm. Now, I went back to reading, and I actually talked to Bob Murphy about this because I gave him this whole service idea, and I threw the whole, you know, everything else past him, and he said, yes, I agree with you, but, you know, and this is even before he came out, like, you know, he recently had come out, like, in favor of it, you know, whereas I don't favor or disfavor it, I just want to understand the damn thing. He gave me some objections that people would throw at me, and you know, he gave me a few chapters in Mises's Theory of Money and Credit and Human Action that I should read. And then, you know, I read that, and I also read a little bit of Eugen von Bauwerk, and I realized Eugen von Bauwerk, he was talking about the value of a good at some point, and he was talking about the value of a good is not inherent to the good itself. It's the service that the good provides. Mm-hmm. And Mises even repeated this. I believe I think it was in Human Action, he repeated something along the same lines. And it's like, wow, well, if it's a service the good provides, that's what's valued, then a service itself, you know, is also valued in the same way. You know, sure, it uses other goods in order for it to be undertaken, but it ultimately, everything that we value economically is the service that it gives to us in terms of utility. So if the utility of Bitcoin is transacting very efficiently and very easily with almost zero cost and nobody that you need to trust in order to recheck it, then that itself represents a huge use value,
right? Just
in and of itself. And so a lot of what I've been seeing people say back and forth and everything else, that's all fine and dandy. That's your opinion. But if you look at this economically and in terms of the regression theorem, there's nothing that you can really say that is not compatible with it. You know, right. And that's something I'm working on right now is because I've been reading all this stuff as far as monetary theory, Austrian monetary theory, is I want to write something. I want to write a positive economic analysis of Bitcoin. And what I mean by positive, that means value-free or wart-free, as Mises would say, which means I'm not expressing my opinion or any normative values here. I'm saying this is what explains this phenomenon, and that's all an economist. I'm not an economist. That's the whole, you know, that is the economist's job, to explain the phenomenon or phenomena that occur in the real world around him.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. And what outlet will you use when you put this together to express this?
Well, well, I've already written 2 drafts that I've thrown out, so I'm on my 3rd right now, and I'm gonna run it by a few friends, who are either economists or well known in speaking about economic topics.
Okay.
And hopefully, I'm not the guy that knows all the citations or quotes to put into everything, because half the time I can't remember, where I read them or whatever. So what I'm trying to do is get the meat of it laid out and then run it by these folks, and hopefully they can co-author it with me if they agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, if it's somebody that's an established economist, then possibly a journal of some sort. I don't know. If I do it on my own, then obviously, my blog plus some Bitcoin supporter or whatever says, "Oh, he solved the problem," But really, that's when I told you guys that I've been reading for about the past 6 months. That's what I've been reading.
Okay.
And stuff like that. So it's just a matter of getting everything, put together as far as how to relay it and everything else. I've never written an article like this before.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I ever write, it's mostly anecdotal stuff that's happened in my life, or certain understandings I came to. I never attempted to do something that's I guess more intellectual or academic.
Sure. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So that kind of led me into one other question I had, which is what you're reading lately. It sounds like you just answered that, but is there anything non-Bitcoin related that you're currently reading?
I read David Graeber's book. Well, I'm not reading anything right now. Right now, just stuff online. I'm not reading any books right now.
Okay.
I went through that whole thing, and I like to take a break, because it's very hard. But I did read David Graeber's book, that the first 5,000 years. It was a horrible book. He was some of the stuff, like he was saying, market doesn't exist, it's just something in our mind, but then he starts referring to the market as if it exists, and then and then he says, well, a state of barter never actually occurred, and then he's showing actual instances of barter occurring in history and in historic man or ancient man, and it's like, all right, make up your mind, man. I mean, come on, you're supposed to be an academic here, and you're supposed to be this widely known anthropologist, but I know 10-year-olds that have better reasoning than this. Another book, which is kind of interesting, was Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, which I don't know if you're aware of that book.
I'm aware of it, but I've not read it.
Okay, it deals with the decline of violence throughout history, which I don't disagree with that. I do believe violence has decreased throughout history, and I think that, there's a lot of factors involved. Humans have become more connected. Technology helps with that, and like I said, the world's become smaller, so it's kind of hard to kill somebody when you've been chatting with them online, for the past 5 months or whatever. You're going to all of a sudden, bomb his nation. It makes it a lot harder.
Yep.
But his entire thesis essentially was that the state was the entire thing that made this happen. And it's like, all right, well, not entirely, but that was central to his thesis, that it's the state that did this for you, and he also said laissez-faire, which I agreed with that, and a bunch of other things, but that was central to what he was saying, that it's the state that does this for us. That's why violence decreases over time, because we have a state.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, the increase in technology and communication really, to me, is just a vehicle for increased exchange.
Right.
And that's, I think, where we're going to see even further decrease in violence, is that you have an economic incentive to not aggress against people. Yes. These people are making my clothes. I would like cheap clothes. I like the clothes I'm wearing. I don't really want to bomb their country, because we have an economic incentive to not do so. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was even a portion in his book where he pointed to some ranchers in California who basically had their own private law system. They didn't use any police or anything like that to resolve their disputes, or courts or anything else. They did it all themselves. And he said, oh, well, this is a case of anarchy, but the only reason why it works is because it still exists with a state. But then he points to, like, say, a ghetto and says, this is another case of anarchy, but, you know, the state, you know, isn't present there. And I'm going, wait a minute. Come on, man. You know, like, make up your mind. Is the state there or is it not? You know, it's like, yeah, there was, but I will say this: his book was a much better reason than Graeber's book. Like, you know, I didn't see the same, you know, just obvious fallacies and just faulty logic that I saw in Graeber's book. Graeber's book was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I it was on Facebook, so I'd have to, like, dig back through my timeline to find it all. But I was like, every time I saw something that was, like, glaringly inconsistent, I would be like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy's saying this. He's supposed to be this and that and everything. And I'll quote what he said, and everybody's like, really? This guy's saying that? Like, whereas Pinker, I didn't run into that problem. And maybe it's because I enjoyed some of his linguistics books and books on experimental psychology. I don't know. But, yeah, it wasn't quite as bad. I just disagreed with his thesis.
Right. Well, to leave off here, one thing I'm dedicated to in my channel is to try to help people live their day-to-day lives in as free and happy place that they possibly can. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be presenting an interview with a lady, for instance, who's getting on a motorcycle and she's touring Mexico, and that's kind of her way of just kind of getting away and living her life as an individual in as free a state as possible. Do you have any parting tips or things that you do in your life that you might want to partake to other people and how to live your life as free as possible?
Sometimes you got to remember, you know, we all like to talk about the state or this and that or whatever bugs us. But what really matters is your friends, the people you know, your family, people like that. I mean, that's what makes us happy. That's what makes us really social beings, and really gets us, you know, it really helps us live our life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, a lot of people can get down in the dumps about stuff or get really depressed about things. If you remember the people that love you, you'll feel loved. And that's what makes everybody feel better.
Awesome. Thanks for that. As we shut things down, how can we find you? How can people find you? We talked about your future projects and things that are coming up, right. But right now, as far as your work or connection, how can people find you?
I do have a blog, joefetz.com. I write there sparingly, but that is where, if I ever do write anything of you know, something I feel that needs to be put out there, that's where it goes. It goes on there. I also got, like, old tunes I wrote and stuff like that on there, which they're not all great or anything, but you know, maybe somebody will like them.
That's subjective.
Yeah, right. You know, obviously I have a Facebook page. I also have a liberty.me site, Luce Conscientia, which I don't know. I was going for a Latin name that means the light of consciousness, but who knows if that's what it really means. I just thought that's where I'll put stuff, any sort of new stuff that I really want to put out there in the libertarian community. You know, not just random thoughts or whatever. It's going to be strictly libertarian oriented. And other than that, I mean, I'm sure you'll see me other places on the internet, random and various and whatnot.
Great. Cool. Well, I look forward to following your adventures and seeing the progression.
And me, you.
Yeah, make sure that you send me some of those links to everything that you just mentioned so that I can post it with this as it gets published. For the entire interview here, uncut, I'll be putting this on my personal website, which is liveallyourlife.com. Okay. And then we'll probably chop this up since we've gone almost 2 hours now. Yeah. And use some bits and pieces for my show on the Voluntary Virtues Network, which is the same title, Live All Your Life. So it's been a pleasure.
Sounds great.
Really enjoyed visiting with you. Yeah.
You too, man. Thanks.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Have a good night.
It's an exciting time to be alive. Instead of just existing, you can truly live all your life. Join our open discussions on business and personal growth, agorism and finances, lifestyle enjoyment, radical health and life extension, science and technology, art and philosophy, all of the aspects to learn how to truly live all your life. LiveAllYourLife.com.